Hello and welcome to the first episode of the CrisisX speaker series. Over the next 8 months, we will provide talks from business leaders as we face the COVID-19 crisis, its impact on business, and the recession and revival to come. This series will provide insights from leaders who have faced significant crises in the past. You will learn from the best about crisis management and receive tips as you gear your own business up to make the most of the post-COVID-19 recovery. Our first guest is the Right Honourable Sir John Key. Sir John was, of course, the 38th Prime Minister of New Zealand and is currently the Chair of ANZ Bank New Zealand, a Director on the ANZ Australia Group Board and a Director of Palo Alto Networks. Sir John will also join us as a keynote speaker at our rescheduled CrisisX conference in February 2021 in Auckland. Sir John Key, thank you for your time. I'd like to start by asking about your own experiences as Prime Minister dealing with major crises. I guess we're all pretty fascinated to know what it's like having to deal with a crisis of national significance such as COVID-19.
Well, the reality is it's tough, and one of the reasons it's tough, of course, is that you've got the welfare and lives of potentially 5 million New Zealanders resting on the decisions that you make. So you have to make the right decisions. You make them often without perfect information. You've got a lot riding on it. So it's a very, very tough thing to do. On the other side of the coin, government is a body, I think, that's actually well established to actually make those decisions and work its way through the challenges. You have a very big civil service. They're well experienced. There's some great people in there. Hopefully, you have some other sort of examples to call on as reference of what might happen. So you have some advantages, but you have a big challenge in front of you.
And I suppose with a pandemic, as you say, with potentially 5 million people it impacts, but other crises are impacting a smaller number of people, but a lot of people are interested. In many cases, it's life and death. How do you deal with that sort of intense pressure during a crisis day after day?
I think the first thing is you've got to remain calm. One of the worst things you can do is actually lose control. And I think when leaders do that, they inevitably make poor decisions for a start off. And secondly, people take a lot from your words, your actions, your demeanour. And if you look a little out of control and flustered and all the rest of it, then that reflects on how they feel, and they're looking to you for leadership. So one of the most important things really is just sort of staying calm, I think. I think the second thing is being upfront and clear with people, telling them what you can do and what you can't do. If you take Christchurch, I think people knew pretty quickly there were some things we could do immediately, and that was provide the wage support. Make sure that there was enough toilets that were operating, make sure that we're moving people to safe and secure surroundings as best we could. But we also made it clear we can't put the pieces back together again in a very short space of time. And I think that's sort of the challenge you've got. So, for instance, COVID-19 is that we can probably manage things within our borders. Our big challenge is how do we intersect with the rest of the world when they have different approaches and varying different degrees of impact from COVID-19. So there's quite a few challenges. But I think if you're clear with people, then they get on board. And New Zealanders actually, I think you saw this again during COVID-19, that they just tend to be a lot more compliant lot than the rest of the world. I mean, Australians, God bless them, they're beautiful people, but, they seem to be wandering around the beaches, didn't seem to have a hell of a lot of an idea about what social distancing was about. Whereas New Zealanders, to me, they really do fall into line and take up whatever the national need is, superbly.
And how difficult is it then to provide that calm face of leadership externally under pretty intense media scrutiny and public interest, when perhaps in some cases what's going on behind the scenes isn't quite as calm as you're gathering information and trying to get to the bottom of what's going on?
Yeah, well, I think you learn actually in that job anyway to deal with the difficulties of, a probing media and some frustrations behind the scenes, while on the other hand trying to present to the public, a pretty clear, dependable, reliable and executable plan, and so hopefully, time on the job, sets you up well for that. I think, there's nothing wrong with emotion, and there's nothing wrong with sort of, at times saying I'm frustrated by this, or exposing a view that says, I don't understand, or I don't have all these facts here and now. But most of all, I was amazed with Christchurch, for instance. I went down there pretty much every week from the time the earthquakes happened until the end of my time as Prime Minister. And every single time I went, people came up to me and said they felt reassured by the fact I was there. And I think that reassurance comes from the fact that they want to know that the government, which has the authority to help and solve some of their issues, is actually engaged, listening and understanding what's going on. So yeah, it's a challenge, but I don't think it's an impossible thing to do. And I think inevitably when you rise to the top of a political party, and that political party is Labour or National, and therefore there's a pretty reasonable chance you might get an opportunity to lead the country, then hopefully there's been a filtering process that means that the person that got there has got some skills at least to execute that kind of function and be able to do it and pull it off appropriately.
And I suppose from an organisational point of view, some of our viewers might be thinking that there are sort of two audiences with some crises. There's your external audience, the public that you need to inform, but then you've got your own people that are looking to you for leadership to help manage what it is you're managing. So does your message change much depending on who you're talking to?
Yeah, I mean, look, in the modern world, it can't change too much. And it certainly shouldn't be duplicitous because we live in a world of social media and things get reported and tweeted and all the rest of it. So, you want to be consistent. But, there's a level sometimes of granularity where, if you take Christchurch earthquakes as an example, I think the entire country sort of sat there with real affection for the people of Canterbury, real support for them, thought there for the grace of God go I. But on the other side of the coin, they didn't need the level of specificity that you might get if you were living in a particular suburb and you're wondering whether portable toilets are going to turn up or whether you're going to be able to go back and your house is going to be part of the red zone. So you get to the point where different audiences require different levels of information. And I think you see that with issues, like, I don't know, certain environmental issues. If you're a farmer living somewhere and it's going to have a big impact on the way you operate, you care a lot about the details. If you're a run-of-the-mill person that lives in Auckland, you might say, look, I care at a big, high level about this issue, but I don't need the information down to a certain level. So that's more where it changes rather than you saying black to one audience and white to another. You wouldn't want to do that.
So as Prime Minister, you're getting advice from lots of different places. Obviously, you have your civil servants and your officials, you've got cabinet, no doubt you've got the leader of the opposition piping up, you've got the media and commentators and so on. So everyone's going to have a different view. How do you decide who to listen to?
I think the first thing is you have to have a plan. I'd say that, and I'd say that for any business, that's out there watching this. I mean, ultimately, and that plan can change. I mean, there'll be so many businesses that, if you ask them in January what they thought the plan was for 2020, you ask them today, man, it's going to be completely different, including how we were going to hold this function. I mean, things change. And you have to adapt to the circumstances that you're in. But I think if you don't have a plan, then you really don't know who to listen to because you will get competing voices. One of the cool things about being Prime Minister is you'll get quite a lot of people who come up to you and say, if you just listen to do this one thing, that'll fix all the issues. It's not quite as simple as that. I would put a fair bit of stock in broadly what the officials say, but I wouldn't listen to it to the extent where I wouldn't hear another voice, if you like. I mean, I think there are lots of stakeholders. And that was why, for instance, we had the job summit when we did, in Christchurch, because we got unions, we got business, we got, individuals, got the government involved, we got a whole range of stakeholders to sort of offer views. So I think part of it is also what you philosophically believe in. And I think that's one of the challenges actually with COVID-19 is that it's either two crises running in parallel, a health crisis and an economic crisis. One is a sort of function of the other, but nevertheless they're together. And you either, I think, say, I'm going to treat them sort of separately, but collectively, because you sort of have to do both. But I do think you need to sort of have an eye for both. In other words, health officials will always be, God bless them, the most conservative people we'll ever meet when it comes to health issues. And I understand and totally get that. But that comes obviously at an enormous economic price. And so the question is, how much can you afford to bear? And that is sort of true, like in a stupid example. But if you went to land transport officials, they'd probably tell you the road, speed limit should be 20 kilometres an hour. Because probably at 20 kilometres an hour, no one dies on the road, or very difficult to die on the road. If you have an accident, you'll survive it. Faster you go, more likely it is that you'll die. Why do we therefore allow people to drive 100 or 110 Ks? Answer is because there's a trade-off there between the economic effects and the efficiency of that versus what is a known likelihood that some people will die on the road. That's a horrible thought, and it's a horrible thing if it happens to one of your family members or someone you love. But the reality is that's the cold, hard calculation that we all make. And I think that's true at COVID-19. I think there's a balance there where we have to think about all parts of this. Obviously, the major focus is going to be health, but ultimately getting people back into work is really important as well, just simply because eventually, people's livelihoods really, rely on that.
So thinking about 2020, and you say the balance between the health consideration and the economic consideration, where do you think we are at as a country right now? What can business expect to see for the balance of the year, do you think?
I think that is a very unknown factor at the moment, simply because in terms of the domestic economy, I'd be surprised if we go dramatically backwards in terms of different levels. I mean, I think we'll stay on level 1. Look, maybe there's a scenario where we end up in level 2, but I don't think we're going back to level 3 or 4 again. And there's lots of good reasons, I think, to support that, mostly being that the lockdown period taught us a lot of different things, the need to test quickly, the need for social distancing, the need to sort of track and trace kind of where we've been. So if we got situations where a community outbreak happened and community transmission happened, then I think we'd be much better actually at dealing with that quite quickly. And certainly that's been the experiences of countries like China, where you've had this sort of second wave coming again, if you like. They've been better at handling it the second time around. I think but I think the problem you've got is this whole issue of, can and will they open up the borders, and will we only open the border if it means that the country has no coronavirus cases? And if that's the case, then you're really saying the borders stay closed until a country either demonstrates it has no cases or we have a vaccine. And I'm not entirely sure that's the approach that, all these countries are going to take. I mean, certainly you can see Europe at the moment opening up their borders to different countries and starting to say, well, we accept that there's some movement and we're going to get better at handling it. And I think that's going to be the challenge for business, is trying to work out what is the message here. Because if you don't open up the borders again, then you've got 5% of your economy just disappears because of international tourism. And that's a big chunk of change. I mean, on the measures that we see at ANZ at the moment, we think we don't get back to where we were in January of 2020. Economically, we don't get back there until the end of 22, maybe 23. So that's just filling the hole. That's not about the economy growing from where it was in January of 2020.
So, I mean, and given that obviously we've got people watching this from lots of different categories, so this is a fairly broad question. But in your opinion, what should business leaders be concentrating on to try and find a way to survive through this crisis and beyond? Yeah,
I mean, I think the first thing is liquidity. I'm obviously, started life as a banker. I'm probably ending life a bit as a banker. So your fortress balance sheet is the most important thing. I mean, you've got to have enough cash to pay the bills, and you're seeing lots of companies going for equity raises at the moment for that. We're seeing a lot of our customers coming in and just shoring up their balance sheet, making sure they've got enough facilities, all that sort of stuff. I think the second thing is you probably got to err on the side of conservatism. I mean, I hate to say that because I don't want to grind the economy to a halt, but I think people just need to make sure their staffing numbers and all those things are appropriately sized. I do think there'll be great opportunities. I don't think it's a matter of absolutely stopping. And I'm involved in a couple of companies that they're actually core net beneficiaries of COVID-19, I hate to say, and they're doing amazingly well. And so, there are companies that are going to thrive and have real opportunities. And there are going to be other companies that have got good balance sheets, pretty much a good business. Maybe they're making less this year than last year, but overall they'll be okay. That will have opportunity to either buy businesses or expand their business or acquire other assets. So I wouldn't sit there with the shutters completely up. I mean, I think I'd take a fairly fair assessment on the basis of the business that you own and run. But certainly just making sure you've got enough cash and the right size of the operation to get through. And I do on the principle that, it'll take a little longer for those markets to open. And if it opens earlier, it's like anything in life, that's a bonus.
Mm. And there have been a few examples of businesses that have pivoted quite significantly in order to try and create some revenue during this process. Yeah. From a business point of view, what sort of considerations need to be made when thinking about changing your business at short notice?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of those businesses are doing it for two things. One, the customer demand. So, often they're retail businesses. They haven't been able to service people. They've wanted to sell their products, and their customers have wanted to buy their products. And so, you've been, sort of fulfilling a need and keeping your business alive. I think the second thing has been that, there still might be a bit of community concern about being out and about. I mean, some people will be a little bit more conservative. I think in New Zealand, most people are probably of the view that I'm not going to catch coronavirus out in, COVID-19 out in the street, so they're not quite so worried. But in other parts of the world, people would be, our daughter's in London, and it's pretty rife over there. So people are a lot more dubious about going to a shopping mall or a supermarket or something like that. So I think the online presence of a business is really changing. I mean, at ANZ, we're starting to look at the footprint, for instance, of the amount of office space that we need. And we're starting to think that, when we return fully to normal, some people will still work from home or work a bit more remotely, or work, a little less likely they'll go to a branch, for instance. So we are starting to change our business. I mean, I don't think everything changes. I mean, I think you get people who say, oh, we'll never get on a plane again and everything will be via Zoom and we won't do things in person. I don't agree with that. I think there are lots of good reasons why we did things the old-fashioned way. And we were always introducing a more digital version of our lives prior to this. And I think that digitization of our lives will continue and it'll have real benefits. But I do think there'll be a bit of a mix and matching. But yeah, I would definitely look and say, if your business can function in a way that doesn't require the physical presence that maybe you had in the past, maybe that even enhances your business, then that's a pretty good thing to do, because there are trends that were washing over the country and over the world anyway, and you may as well embrace those. So like anything in life, I mean, countries typically, I mean, there's no perfect model, but normally they have a recession kind of every decade or so. I mean, Australia was very unusual, went 28 years without a recession. That was really unusual. Normally they happen kind of every decade. So, this isn't the first time we've been in a recession or the first time we've faced, sort of adversity. And, what you see from the adversity is the stronger companies actually come out the other end in good shape, and they actually often get a lot stronger. So it is a sort of a way of dealing with that and making sure we strengthen, our companies. But they are going to have to work harder over the course of the next 12 to 18 months. But that's just the brutal reality that every dollar is going to be a little harder to make. And so they're going to have to work hard to, secure them.
And finally, I'd just like to ask about, New Zealand seems to have handled the health side of the pandemic relatively well, especially comparatively speaking to other countries.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of talk internationally on social media and elsewhere about how New Zealand has, albeit with a small population, done quite well on that front. Do you see any brand benefits for New Zealand Inc. generally, because we seem to have managed the virus relatively well?
Yeah, I think it's definitely a plus. I mean, if you look at tourism, which is a huge part of, our economy, people want to come here for lots of reasons. It's safe, it's beautiful, people are friendly. And the fact that we can handle, a pandemic like COVID-19 well, is really good for the country. It's a great thing. And, I do think there'll be lots of people who will be very reluctant to go and travel. I mean, with the greatest respect, would any of us get up and say we're going to hold out in Brazil anytime soon? I mean, I wouldn't, I just sort of think, the health risk is far too great. Whereas, the counter argument would be true. I think, would you come to New Zealand if you were allowed to? Absolutely you would. And I don't know why, but in my mind anyway, we've always run this 100% pure tag for tourism in New Zealand. Now, I'm not saying we're pure because we did a pretty good job managing COVID-19, but my point is really, it just sort of reinforces that feeling I think that people have of New Zealand, that we're a really good first world country, a good health systems, we do things professionally. Like I said, we're compliant, we're good at dealing with those things. So look, it's got to be good for New Zealand on many, many fronts. I reckon got to be great for us.
Thank you very much for your time. That was the Right Honourable Sir John Key. You can see Sir John speak live at our rescheduled CrisisX conference on February 15th and 16th, 2021 at the Grand Millennium Hotel in Auckland, with thanks to our partners NZI, HP, NZME, Incident Eye and Palo Alto Networks. Our next episode will come to you in mid-July. Until then, stay safe and goodbye.